Hi there, and welcome to this episode of the Future of Fitness with me, Alice Bowmaker. And this is a special edition because I am going to be sharing with you some information about cyclical living, and this is something that has been requested from me from quite a few people. So I've taken the time to put together some of my understanding around cyclical living, and I want to share a bit about my journey into it, what exactly it means, and how I would recommend for you to get started. So if we get started with cyclical living, it can basically be broken down into many different cycles. So you could be somebody that is following your menstrual cycle. You could be also interested in the moon cycle. You could be interested in seasonal cycles, and finally there is such thing as life cycles as well. And what I find fascinating is that you can kind of overlay each of these cycles, and they all have 4 segments to them. And you'll understand more about that in a moment when I explain exactly how. And another aspect that I find fascinating is that we tend to live in more of a linear society, and that means that we're always trying to push forwards and we're always trying to be more, and we're in this linear push. Whereas cyclical living is a breath of fresh air to that, because it offers us that time to push ourselves forwards and expand and do more, but then it also offers us that time to draw back in, to rest, to rejuvenate, and to reflect on where things have gone right and where things have perhaps gone wrong. So if that sounds good to you, maybe cyclical living is something that you would want to start to pursue in your life. If we take, for example, the moon cycle and the different 4 stages of the moon cycle as a form of a template or a guidance, we start with, say, the dark moon, or some people call it the new moon. And the dark moon represents a time of darkness because there's no light from the moon. It's a time of stillness and intuition, and perhaps because in darkness it represents a time of going more inwards. And so we have that time, and then we move into our second phase, which is the waxing moon, which is where the moon is going from the darkness, the new moon, into, like, it's getting bigger, so you can start to see probably about half of the moon in that phase. And that represents a time of new beginnings. If you think of that energy going from nothing at the dark moon to the waxing moon, I should say, you think of that energy starting to build and that light starting to increase. So that's a really good time for thinking about new beginnings and making plans and starting to be a little bit more out in the world. You could take a bit more on your plate. Then we move into the full moon, which is where the moon is the brightest. It's the biggest, boldest, out there, shining bright type of space. And the full moon is our place of everything is amplified. It's the opposite of the dark moon. Everything is bigger, better. It's a time where maybe we feel we'd want to be seen. We would have that interview, or we would have a presentation. We would be the belle of the ball. We might go on a date. It's that time for being in that full goddess, divine feminine space. And we can usually take on a little bit more in that time, so our schedules might be a little bit fuller. And then we move into the next and final phase, which is the waning moon, and that's where we're going from that high of the full moon, and we're starting to dip a little bit. The energy is starting to drop down, and then we're moving towards that dark moon phase. We're going from that pinnacle depth of the dark moon. So in our waning phase of the moon, you might think about slowing down, doing a little bit less, slowing your exercise program down, trying to decrease that stress load and try to decrease things that might be stressful for you. And also starting to reflect upon things that are not working for you at the moment. And you might notice it's a time of a little bit of angst and heightened emotions, as there's a bit of friction at that point. So that's how I would explain it in terms of the moon cycle. So that if you're not menstruating, or you don't really have a regular cycle at the moment, the moon cycle could be a really good place to start with cyclical living. Now, we can move into the menstrual cycle now, which you could almost completely, well, you can completely overlap with the moon cycle in terms of that dark moon phase of the moon cycle is reflected in our menstruation or our period. So that's a time when we would want to rest and be still and, take care of ourselves and do a little bit less. And then we can move into our pre-ovulation phase. So this is our follicular phase in the menstrual cycle. And again, you might notice that after your period, you feel a bit lighter and you feel a bit more upbeat, and is a time where we could probably start a cleanse or a new workout regime or start to create new ideas. And then you can move into our ovulation, which represents the full moon. It's that big, bold, being seen part of our cycle. And then moving down into our luteal phase, which is just past ovulation. And this is the phase where we're starting to move towards our kind of end of the cycle. And it's a time when often people can feel more heightened emotions because we're starting to drop away some of the hormones and get ready for that, our menstrual cycle. So that's pre-period, probably about a week before your period, is a really good time to rest and really not a good time to stress yourself out. Because we're having such a drop of hormones at the end of our towards the end of the menstrual cycle, we're less resilient to stress, and it can affect us more negatively if we're if we're dealing with a lot of stressful things. And you might notice if you have a stressful pre-period that your period is a little bit more painful and uncomfortable. So really good to experiment with how you take care of yourself before your period and how that affects the experience of your period. And that includes if you're drinking a lot of alcohol and eating a lot of processed chemical-filled food and a lot of sugar, inflammation emotionally and physically that you would experience at your period. Another aspect we can look at is the seasonal cycles, which again can overlay the menstrual cycle and overlay the moon cycle. If we think about our period, it is similar to the dark moon, but also similar to winter. So when we're in winter and in that winter phase, generally it is a time to slow down. The weather is darker and wetter and colder, and it's a time when we want to hibernate and rejuvenate. So winter, dark moon, new moon, and our menstruation can all overlay each other. The next phase would be spring. So after winter comes spring, and as you can feel, the flowers are starting to bud and bloom, and that is our time of new beginnings. So if you are wanting to start something new, a new project, spring is a great time to do that, because you've had all of that rest and reflection over winter, and now the days are starting to brighten up, it's getting warmer, and we've got that sense of new beginnings in the air. And you might notice it feels easier to start something new. And then we move into summer, which is obviously we'll know by now, that will represent ovulation or the full moon. What I find fascinating is the summer is a time when people tend to take off, like have a really long summer holiday, which I find fascinating, because I think it should potentially be a time when we should be in that full manifestation, productive space, because we're in that most high energy part of the cycle. Interesting. Like I said, our society isn't run really by seasonal cycles, it's more linear, so people don't really take that into account. But I would say if you're trying to live in a seasonal cycle, that summer would be a time when you would try to be the most productive. You've got the light from the sun, the longest days, and you can really make the most of that. If we're moving into our next phase, it's obviously our autumn phase, and that is a time of, well, the leaves are shedding, they're falling, obviously they're showing us it's a time of letting go and starting to slow down, and they're not producing new plants and leaves and vegetables and stuff. So it's a time for us to wind down a little bit and take on less, to not necessarily think about big new beginnings, and for a time to take care of ourselves. I would say in autumn is a really good time for self-care, maybe planning to go on a retreat or workshops, and really just taking that time to be more connected and self-aware and inward. And then we move into winter, which is where we started. So we're in that, hopefully you're starting to see these cycles are an opportunity for us to have that death and rebirth all the time, so that we feel that sense of transformation and movement, and also hope that new beginnings are always around the corner, and we can be clever and start to use our cycles to know when to push forwards and to know when to rest, so that we avoid burnout and we can be more connected to our body and to nature. If you think about it, nature and our bodies are really giving us that GPS and that kind of template to follow. But we live in a more patriarchal, masculine energy society, which ignores all of that and tells us to just push forwards all the time. So it is quite complex. There's lots of cycles to work with, and I would say just choose one to start off with. Your menstrual cycle, if you do still menstruate, might be your easiest place, because you'll start to listen to your body, and it'll feel more and more natural to not push through the pain, and to not push through the tiredness, and to not push through the burnout. But the moon cycles will also do that just as well, and you can get amazing calendars and things like that can offer just a really good reminder of where we're at in the moon cycle. So I wanted to move a little bit more now into my personal journey and why I got into this. I think obviously, like a lot of things, there's little hints from the universe or from life that point you to a way that makes sense to you and are living a way that feels more authentic to how you want to live your life. And I would say the first time I heard about it was with Lisa Lister, and her book was it was all about embracing your menstrual cycle, and the history of our menstrual cycles is that they used to actually be really sacred, and powerful times, and a time for us to connect more to the divine feminine and to meditate and to connect more to our feminine power. However, when the church came along and many other organizations, they saw this power and were afraid of it, and then tried to put a lot of shame and fear into people around their menstrual cycles. So that's one aspect to it, and I found that fascinating. And we can all probably resonate that we have maybe felt a bit of shame around our menstrual cycles and a little bit of pain and discomfort, and it's probably put upon us by our family, our friends, society, and actually it's quite an amazing thing that we go through each month. We actually go through, if you think about it more kind of energetically and spiritually, we're going through a massive change of reality each month. We're going from feeling more kind of, I guess, less practical, more creative, more otherworldly when we're in our yin part of the cycle, which is from our for luteal phase to menstruation. That's more of a yin phase of the cycle, and it's more feminine energy based, and will probably feel a bit less practical in that time. It'll feel maybe harder to, I find it harder to do things like driving and parallel parking, and so we're in that space for part of our cycle, and then we move into a more yang space as we go towards our ovulation, and we feel totally different. And yet we are supposed to show up every day as if we're exactly the same, but we're going through this total change of reality every single month. And I think that's quite amazing that women have that, and it should be embraced. I used to really struggle also with my eating. I had an eating disorder in the past. Came to the conclusion that yo-yo dieting that a lot of women do is not by chance. It's some kind of way of being more cyclical, I think, in how we eat. So I had this pinnacle idea that what if we ate cyclically and consciously with that. So rather than going on a super strict diet and then failing at it and feeling all that shame and overeating afterwards, what if we consciously ate more at certain times of our cycle and ate less at other times of our cycle? So, for example, I am currently in this spring to summer phase, this going from the follicular to ovulation phase, and I know that I always feel less hungry, and I can go most of the day and I will have a little bit here and there, but I won't be eating that much and won't feel the same sugar and hunger cravings. But then as I come to the second part of my cycle, I tend to get more hungry and have those cravings. So I'll let myself eat more without the shame, without all that psychological push and pull. And I find that I naturally can just eat more and less and stay at the same weight. I think if we're going in a shame yo-yo dieting cycle, we tend to eat more for longer because there is this kind of I've messed up attitude, so I might as well just give up and eat loads for days and days and days, and that can last for weeks and weeks and weeks. Whereas if I'm consciously allowing myself to eat a bit more without the shame, I'll just generally maybe do it for a couple of days, and then I'll naturally eat less when my appetite goes down at the other part of my cycle. And I think that's really cool because I don't have to diet now. I maybe sometimes know that I'm eating a little more processed food or a little more sugar, but that's easier to kind of curb. I can just drop that away. So I definitely would recommend that, and looking at how to consciously eat with your cycle. If we're looking at it from a hormonal basis, we know that estrogen, when estrogen is on the rise, it tends to curb our sugar cravings, and then when it drops away at the end of our cycle, it can increase our sugar cravings, which I think is fascinating because a lot of women who are menopausal or perimenopausal tend to gain weight, and I think that's not necessarily to do with how the hormones interact with the food. I think it's to do with, because they have less estrogen, they crave more sugar and so eat more sugar. So people who are perimenopausal, I would definitely recommend to work on sugar addictions and having a higher protein, lower sugar diet and higher fat. Another fascinating thing around our menstrual cycle is that if you are somebody that has suffered with addictions, they say that a high percentage of women relapse in the week before their period, and that's because during our cycle it goes like this. We have our period, and then we have this slow build of estrogen as we come towards ovulation. Estrogen gives us that sense of pleasure and feel good. And then after ovulation, we have a little bit of a dip of estrogen, which you might notice you get a little bit of a dip in mood after your ovulation. And then with that, as the estrogen starts to go down, we start to now get, after ovulation, a bit of progesterone, which goes in a nice curve. And progesterone helps us to sleep and also feel calm. So, and then the week or a few days before our period, both of those hormones drop away. So we effectively go through a massive withdrawal, like a drug withdrawal, every single month. And so if you're somebody that has suffered with addictions, you might notice those cravings show up the week before your period. So I think that's really helpful to just have that awareness so you can plan for it and you can have activities in place the week before your cycle and know to avoid things that might trigger you as much as you can. I definitely noticed I used to drink alcohol, and I tried to drink alcohol for a long time, but I found that it really messed with my mental health and my hormone levels, and so I stopped drinking alcohol, and I found that actually not having alcohol helped with my mood as well. So pre-period and into my period, it has softened my mood fluctuations. And I definitely think that alcohol, because your body detoxes estrogen and alcohol by the liver, if you're having excess estrogen, that can disrupt your mood. And so if you're drinking a lot of alcohol, obviously the body is going to prioritize detoxing the alcohol rather than the estrogen. So it could lead to increased estrogen levels if you are drinking a lot of alcohol, which then can affect your mood. And I definitely noticed that perhaps for me, taking out the alcohol has helped to reduce those estrogen levels. The hormones are fascinating. They're just such a fragile and complicated thing, and they need to be at just the right level for us to move smoothly through our cycle. And so for me, taking anything out that might disrupt my hormone cycle was quite imperative. I understand that not everyone's going to do it, but I would recommend trying it out if you really suffer from your PMS or pain during your menstrual cycle. I would try that out, taking out alcohol and perhaps some caffeine and as many chemicals as you can, so not processed food, and sugar. It seems like quite a lot, but if you do it gradually over time, you might start to notice that you don't crave these things because you're living in a life that is more balanced and calm, and it feels better than going for all of those stimulants all the time. Another fascinating thing I think is that when menopausal or perimenopausal women are really suffering, they tend to suffer from things like anxiety and lack of sleep or not being able to sleep, as well as low moods and increased sugar cravings. And as you maybe know now, all of those things we've been getting from progesterone and estrogen, and then as they've been taken away, our body is trying to rebalance itself. And so in the rebalancing itself, we'll notice all of these withdrawal effects happening, such as the anxiety, restless sleep, sugar cravings, low mood, and over time it will start to level itself out, but unfortunately it does take quite a long time. So I'd recommend don't suffer with it, and do get the help you need, and do try to take care of your diet and your and exercise is really important as well during that perimenopausal and menopausal time. So how do you get started? Well, I would say the first thing you could do is just track your cycle or track the moon cycle. A really simple way to do that is you can get an app, which is quite good for that. Or if you want to become more aware of how your mood changes throughout the month, you could start a journal. So marking day 1 of the moon cycle or of your menstrual cycle, and then maybe just writing out a few words each day and seeing how you feel. And it's really good when you go back because you can see that massive change of emotions. And while in the time it feels like this is going on forever, you can see, oh, there's a bit of a pattern going on. Another option is to simply draw out a circle and cut into segments around however long your cycle is, 30, 28 days, and then mark in that circle in each segment each day, and then you can write a kind of a word for that, how you felt on each day, and then when you go back to it, you'll have a really clear visual representation of how you felt on each day, and you'll maybe start to see a little bit of a pattern there. So that's really cool and fascinating. And you'll notice over time you might not need to write all of this down because it will all just be in the back of your head as you're going through your days and planning your days. You'll start to be more aware of, okay, so it's my period now, likely in 2 weeks' time I have ovulation, so that's a really good time where I could book a little bit more into my diary, put a little bit more on my plate. And then and then at ovulation you'll start to maybe think, oh yeah, I've got my period in 2 or 3 weeks, so the week before that maybe I want to plan less and I want to make sure I'm prioritizing self-care and slowing down, moving my body as well. The week before your period is a really good time to journal because our inner critic tends to come up, and so it's a perfect time to the inner critic is quite brutal sometimes, but also can have some words of wisdom in there if we can sift through all that negativity. So we can use our inner critic to look at perhaps where we could make some changes in our life. And I would recommend doing that a couple of weeks before your period. So instead of all of that negativity staying stuck in your head, it can be on a piece of paper and you can see it a little clearer and sort it out, what's useful and what's not, and disregard what's not. In my course at the Red School, they used to say that if we don't acknowledge our inner critic at its perfect phase of the cycle, which is pre-period, it will start to filter through the rest of the month, and we'll start to feel a little bit critical about ourselves the rest of the month because it hasn't been acknowledged and really taken account of. So you could play around with that and see how that affects you if you're somebody that often suffers with a lot of self-criticism, is just dedicating some time to being connected to the inner critic and trying to work out what is it trying to tell me. And all of this stuff might seem like a lot, and it might feel impossible to change your life around your cycle at the moment. And you might not be able to because you have a 9 to 5 job, and you have kids all the time, and you have a partner, and you have a business. So my suggestion is to just set that intention for that 1%. And you'll notice magically, this does happen. Suddenly people will start to cancel plans around your period, and people will give more help to you at certain points, or that important opportunity will come up around your ovulation. So set that intention just for that 1% change, and over time it will start to increase, and it will start to really change. And you'll notice maybe in a year's time, wow, my life has really changed. Like, I am so much more cyclical and so much less burnt out. All right, so I wanted to finish with a few of my recommendations of what I would recommend for each part of the cycle, so that maybe you could start to implement these into your life. So if you wanted to note down these things because it feels easier, feel free to do so. Or if you go to my Instagram page, I've already made a lovely post with some lovely slides, and it's very clearly, it writes out what to do in each phase of the cycle. So if we think about the winter part of our cycle, which is the period part of the cycle, it is our new moon, dark moon phase of the cycle. This is a perfect time to do gentle, slow movement and yoga. It's a great time for being out in nature, taking that time to be more intuitive and to meditate. It's a really good time to reflect and allow yourself to eat a little bit more. And by that I mean root vegetables, lots of wholesome home-cooked food. Have some dark chocolate if you want it. And take time to be less practical and more intuitive and more still. If we move into our spring phase, and that is in our follicular phase, in our waxing moon phase, this is a wonderful time to do a cleanse. It's a good time to start a new workout regime, a good time to be creative and plant new seeds, as we do in spring. And you could start to plan a bit more, make your schedule maybe a little busier. And then we're moving into our summer phase, and this is like our ready to go. It's more of a yang phase of the cycle. So it's a great time to do the difficult things, the hard things, because we're a bit more resilient, like the tax return. It's a great time to push yourself a bit more in your workout, to push your body. And you could probably eat a little lighter in your meals. It's a good time to do a job interview, to go on a date with somebody new, just to try something different. And then finally into our final autumnal phase, which is our luteal phase. And this is the perfect time to keep moving, because that will help with the inner critic. So keep your movement practice, but maybe you just go a little bit lighter with your exercise. You maybe have a few less social engagements, maybe just saving it for those nearest and dearest who you feel you can get the most support from. A really good time to journal and get those words out, all of that truth speaking of the inner critic. A really good time to not drink alcohol, to not have a lot of sugar or processed food, to keep it really, really neutral and soft, and a great time to do breath work as well. So those are my recommendations, and I think I could probably talk about this forever. But I hope this brings a bit more clarity to cyclical living and also makes it feel a little more accessible and something that you would be able to integrate into your everyday life. So thank you for listening to this. I really appreciate your time. And if you are interested to learn more about this, I do have a workshop coming up, which will help just for you to ask me questions, for us to learn about how to integrate cyclical living into our life. There'll be some breath work and some yoga alongside that. And it's an online workshop. It's coming up in April on the 14th. And I'll pop the link somewhere below, which you'll be able to find. And I'd really love it if you joined, because I just want to bring more awareness to cyclical living. And we can only do it if we join together and take the time to learn and change our ways. So thank you so much for listening. Feel free to share this with your friends, anyone that you think could do with a little bit of a change with their lifestyle, or somebody that's feeling burnt out or disconnected with themselves. Please share this, and I will be back soon with more information and a new podcast coming up. Thank you for joining. Have a wonderful, wonderful day wherever you are. Take care.